The transport ship's engines hummed their funeral dirge as Zara Nightfall pressed her palm against the cold viewport, watching the imperial capital shrink into a distant star. Her reflection stared back, once proud features now etched with the weight of betrayal, silver hair that had once been her crown now hanging loose and disheveled. Behind her, the chains around her wrists clinked softly with each movement, a metallic reminder of how far she had fallen. "Mama," whispered her son Kale, his small hand finding hers through the restraints. At 12 years old, he was too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, but old enough to see the tears his mother tried to hide. "It's going to be all right," Zara murmured, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. The trial had been a farce, 3 days of manufactured evidence, paid witnesses, and a tribunal that had made their decision before she'd even entered the chamber. 20 years of faithful service to the Galactic Federation meant nothing when politics demanded a scapegoat. The ship lurched as they dropped out of hyperspace, and through the viewport, the barren moon of Zirion came into view. It was a dead world, scarred by ancient meteor impacts and devoid of any natural atmosphere. The perfect prison for those the Federation wanted to forget. "Why did they do this to us?" Kale asked, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. Zara knelt beside her son, ignoring the bite of the restraints. "Because I chose to do what was right instead of what was profitable. I discovered something they wanted to keep hidden: evidence that the Federation had been exploiting the outer colonies, stealing resources while their people starved." She cupped his face gently. "I tried to expose the truth, and they branded me a traitor for it." The boy's eyes, so like his father's, deep brown with flecks of gold, hardened with a wisdom beyond his years. "Then they're the real traitors, perhaps," Zara said softly. "But they're the ones with the power to decide who history remembers as heroes and who as villains." The transport shuddered as it entered Zirion's artificial atmosphere dome. Through the viewport, Zara could see the exile settlement, a collection of prefabricated buildings clustered around a central hub, surrounded by the red dust and twisted metal of the moon's surface. It looked like exactly what it was, a place where people were sent to be forgotten. The security officer who escorted them off the ship was a young woman with regulation short blonde hair and eyes that wouldn't meet Zara's gaze. She'd probably heard the stories. The great Zara Nightfall, former ambassador to the core worlds, architect of the peace accords that had ended the rebellion wars. Now just another exile with a number instead of a name. "You'll be assigned housing unit for 7B, the officer said, her voice professionally neutral. "Basic provisions are delivered weekly. The work assignments will be posted tomorrow." As they walked through the settlement, Zara noticed the other exiles watching them with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Some she recognized from the newsfeed's former officials who had asked too many questions, journalists who had published inconvenient truths, military officers who had refused illegal orders. All of them united now in their shared disgrace. Their assigned housing was a small dome with 2 rooms, basic furniture, and a food synthesizer that looked like it had seen better decades. Kale explored their new home with the resilience of youth, but Zara sank into a chair and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd lost everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom. But as she watched her son unpack their few belongings with quiet determination, she realized that perhaps the Federation had made a mistake. They'd thought exile would break her spirit, make her fade into obscurity. Instead, they'd given her something far more dangerous: nothing left to lose. That night, as Kale slept in the small bedroom, Zara stood outside their dome and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the artificial atmosphere and the patrol ships that kept watch over Zirion, the Federation continued its corruption. The colonies still suffered. The truth was still buried beneath layers of lies and political maneuvering. "I promise you," she whispered to the silent stars, "this isn't the end. They think they've silenced me, but they've only given me time to plan. And when we return, they'll understand that some fires burn brighter when you try to snuff them out." The next morning brought their first taste of exile life. Zara was assigned to the recycling center, where she spent her days sorting through the detritus of a dozen worlds. The work was monotonous, designed to break the spirit of those who had once shaped galactic policy. But Zara found a strange peace in it, each piece of discarded technology, each fragment of a broken device, told a story of waste and excess that only reinforced her conviction that the Federation's corruption ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. Kale, meanwhile, was enrolled in the settlement's makeshift school. The teacher, a former university professor named Marcus Webb, had been exiled for refusing to alter his research on corporate environmental damage. He took a special interest in the boy, recognizing the sharp intelligence that burned behind his young eyes. "Your mother was right to do what she did," Marcus told Kale one afternoon as they walked home from school. "History will vindicate her, even if the present cannot." "History is written by the winners," Kale replied, repeating something he'd heard from another exile. Marcus smiled sadly. "Then perhaps it's time for different people to start winning." As weeks turned to months, Zara began to notice something unexpected happening. The exiles weren't just surviving, they were organizing. Quietly, carefully, they shared information, pooled resources, and began to plan. Former intelligence officers taught surveillance techniques. Disgraced scientists worked on improvised technology. Military officers trained younger exiles in tactics and strategy. And at the center of it all, Zara found herself becoming something she'd never expected to be: a leader of the dispossessed. Her reputation, her experience, and her unwavering conviction that the Federation could be challenged made her a natural focal point for their growing resistance. "We can't stay here forever," she told the inner circle of exiles who had formed around her. "But we can't leave until we're ready to make a real difference. The Federation thinks they've buried us, but they've actually created something far more dangerous: a group of people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain." One evening, as Zara tucked Kale into bed, he looked up at her with those serious brown eyes. "Mama, are we ever going to go home?" Zara smoothed his hair, thinking of the apartment they'd shared on the capital world, the life they'd built before everything came crashing down. "We'll make a new home," she said finally, "and someday, when you're older, we'll return to the stars. But when we do, it won't be as exiles. It will be as something else entirely." "What?" Kale asked. Zara smiled, and for the first time since their exile began, it reached her eyes as the future they never saw coming. Outside their dome, the artificial stars of Zirian's night sky twinkled like distant promises. The Federation had tried to bury Zara Nightfall, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail: stars don't die quietly, they explode. And their light reaches across the galaxy long after everyone thinks they're gone. The exile had only just begun, but so had the revolution. 8 years had transformed Kale Nightfall from a grieving boy into something far more dangerous. A young man with his mother's intelligence and his father's ruthless pragmatism. At 20, he moved through the shadows of the galaxy's underworld with the fluid grace of someone who had learned early that survival meant becoming invisible until the moment you chose to strike. The cantina on Raven's Edge was exactly the kind of place where deals were made and people disappeared. Smoke from a dozen different worlds hung in the air like a toxic fog, and the patrons kept their faces hidden beneath hoods or behind the glow of personal shields. Kale sat in a corner booth, nursing a drink that could strip paint while he waited for his contact. She arrived precisely on time, sliding into the seat across from him with the confident ease of someone who owned every room she entered. Tessa Voidheart was a legend in the smuggling trade, a woman who could move anything anywhere for the right price. Her dark hair was cut in an asymmetrical style that framed high cheekbones and eyes, the color of deep space. She wore a form-fitting flight suit that managed to look both practical and alluring, and the plasma pistol at her hip suggested she was more than capable of handling trouble. "You're younger than I expected," she said, studying him with the calculating gaze of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "You're exactly what I expected," Kale replied, meeting her stare without flinching. "Beautiful, dangerous, and expensive." Tessa laughed, a sound like silver bells with an edge of steel. "Flattery will get you everywhere, kid. But my rates are still the same." "I'm not here to hire you for a single job," Kale said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm here to offer you a partnership." "I don't do partnerships," Tessa said immediately. Too many complications, even for a chance to bring down the Federation. That got her attention. The casual amusement in her eyes sharpened into something more focused. That's a dangerous topic of conversation, even in a place like this. Cale pulled out a small data chip and placed it on the table between them. My mother was Zara Nightfall. Tessa's expression didn't change, but Cale caught the slight tensing of her shoulders. The way her hand moved fractionally closer to her weapon, the traitor ambassador, the woman who tried to expose the Federation's crimes. Cale corrected. She's been building something on Zirion for the past 8 years, a network of exiles, dissidents, and people who remember what the Federation used to stand for before it became a tool of corporate oppression. And you're what? Her messenger. Boy, I'm her son, Cale said simply, and I'm the one who's going to give her an army. Tessa leaned back, studying him with new interest. You're serious, dead serious. Cale's voice carried the weight of years spent planning this moment. The Federation thinks they've won because they control the military, the media, and the major trade routes, but they've forgotten about the spaces between the smugglers, the pirates, the independent traders who keep the galaxy running. People like you, people like me don't fight wars, Tessa said. We profit from them. What if I told you that bringing down the Federation would be the most profitable venture you've ever undertaken? Tessa's smile was sharp as a blade. Then, I'd say you have my attention. Over the next hour, Cale laid out his plan. It was audacious in its scope and elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to match the Federation's military might, they would strike at its economic foundation. A coordinated campaign of disruption that would target supply lines, communication networks, and the corporate infrastructure that kept the Federation's war machine running. We're not trying to conquer worlds, Cale explained. We're trying to make the cost of oppression higher than the profit. Every stolen shipment, every sabotaged facility, every intercepted communication will cost them credits and credibility. And your mother, she's been preparing for this moment since the day they exiled her. When the time is right, she'll return not as a fugitive, but as the leader of a revolution. Tessa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table as she considered his proposal. Finally, she spoke. I know people, good people who've been hurt by the Federation's policies, independent traders who've been forced out of business by corporate monopolies, smugglers who've lost friends to Federation patrol ships, pirates who remember when the Outer Rim was free. Will they follow you? They'll follow profit, Tessa said pragmatically. But if you can promise them that, she studied his face in the dim light of the cantina. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Cale hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. The Federation is planning something called the Unification Protocol. Complete centralization of power, elimination of planetary autonomy, and the establishment of corporate governance over all human worlds. My mother's contacts in the exile community have been gathering intelligence for years. When? Soon, maybe. Within the next 2 years, once they implement it, there won't be any independent worlds left to rebel. Tessa's eyes hardened. Then we don't have much time. No, Cale agreed. We don't. She extended her hand across the table. Partners? Cale clasped her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years handling ship controls and weapons. Partners. Their first operation together was a test intercepting a Federation supply convoy, carrying medical supplies to a corporate mining colony. While the miners themselves died of preventable diseases, Tessa's ship, the Shadow Dancer, was a modified freighter that looked like a rust bucket but could outrun most military vessels. Her crew was small but skilled. Marcus, a former Federation pilot who'd been court-martialed for refusing to bomb. Civilians, Nina, a young slicer who could crack any security system, and Torvin, a massive alien whose species had been displaced by Federation expansion. The operation went flawlessly. They hit the convoy at a hyperspace junction, disabled the escorts with ion cannons, and transferred the medical supplies to unmarked shuttles that would deliver them to the mining colony. The entire operation took less than an hour, and by the time Federation reinforcements arrived, they were already 3 jumps away. Not bad for a first date, Tessa said as they celebrated in the ship's common area. Is that what this was? Cale asked. accepting a glass of genuine Corellian whiskey. What would you call it? Kale met her gaze across the table, seeing something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The beginning of something beautiful. Over the following months, their partnership deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Tessa found herself drawn to Kel's quiet intensity, his unwavering dedication to his mother's cause, and the way he treated her as an equal rather than a tool to be used. Kale, meanwhile, was captivated by Tessa's fierce independence, her loyalty to her crew, and the vulnerability she occasionally let slip through her tough exterior. Their operations grew more ambitious. They recruited other smugglers, pirates, and independent traders, building a network that stretched across dozens of star systems. Each success brought them closer together, and each shared danger forged a bond that went beyond mere partnership. It was after a particularly risky operation rescuing political prisoners from a Federation detention facility that things between them finally came to a head. They were alone on the bridge of the Shadow Dancer, the rest of the crew asleep after the exhausting mission. You could have been killed tonight, Tessa said, her voice tight with emotion she'd been trying to suppress. So could you, Kale replied, moving closer to where she stood at the navigation console. That's different. I chose this life, and I chose you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Tessa turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his face. Kale, I know, he said softly. It's complicated. We're fighting a war, building a revolution. This isn't the time for personal feelings. Then why does it feel like the only time? He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Because we might not survive what's coming. Because some things are worth the risk. When their lips met, it was like the collision of two stars, inevitable, explosive, and beautiful. They'd been dancing around their attraction for months, but now the barriers finally fell away. In the quiet of the ship's bridge, with the stars wheeling past outside, they discovered that love could bloom even in the darkness of space. Later, as they lay together in Tessa's cabin, she traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. Your mother, she said quietly. Will she approve? Kale was quiet for a moment, thinking of Zara on distant Sirian, preparing for her return to the galaxy that had cast her out. She'll approve of anything that makes me happy, he said finally. And you make me very happy. Good, Tessa murmured, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Because I plan to keep doing it for a very long time. Outside the cabin, the Shadow Dancer continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying its cargo of rebels and revolutionaries toward their destiny. In the darkness between stars, love had found a way to flourish, giving them both something worth fighting for beyond justice and revenge. The revolution was growing, and at its heart, two people had found each other across the vast emptiness of space. Soon, Kale knew, they would need to return to Sirian to reunite with his mother and plan the next phase of their war against the Federation. But for now, in this moment, the asteroid field known as the Graveyard stretched endlessly through space, a maze of tumbling rock and twisted metal that had once been a thriving mining operation. Now it served as the perfect hiding place for those who needed to disappear. From the galaxy's watchful eyes, deep within its heart, carved into the largest asteroid, lay the headquarters of what the Federation had begun calling the Shadow Network. Tessa guided the Shadow Dancer through the treacherous field with practiced ease, her hands steady on the controls despite the tension that had been building between her and Kale. For weeks, they'd been operating together for over a year now, and their network of rebels and smugglers had grown beyond anything either had imagined. But success brought its own complications. Docking Bay 7 is clear, came Nina's voice over the comm. The young slicer had become their primary coordinator, managing communications between dozens of cells across the galaxy. As they settled into the hidden docking bay, Kale stood behind Tessa's pilot chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. The gesture was casual, but she could feel the weight of unspoken concerns in his touch. We need to talk, he said quietly, once the ship's systems had powered down. I know. Tessa's voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. But first, we need to deal with the Vanguard situation. The Vanguard was a Federation Special Operations unit that had been tracking their activities. With increasing accuracy, 3 of their cells had been compromised in the past month, and dozens of good people were now in Federation detention centers. The pressure was mounting, and with it, the strain on their relationship. They made their way through the asteroid base's corridors, passing rebels and smugglers from a dozen different worlds. The base had grown far beyond its original purpose, becoming a small city hidden in the darkness between stars. Scientists worked alongside soldiers. Former Federation officers trained alongside Outer Rim pirates, and at the center of it all, a holographic planning chamber where their war against the galaxy's most powerful force was being orchestrated. Kale, Tessa. The voice belonged to Raven Cross, a former Federation intelligence officer who joined them after discovering her own government's plans to eliminate her as a security risk. She was tall and pale, with prematurely silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "We've got a problem." She activated the central holo display, showing star charts peppered with red indicators. "The Vanguard isn't just tracking us randomly. They're following a pattern, systematically working their way toward our major cells. At this rate, they'll reach Zirion within 6 months. Tessa felt Kale tense beside her. His mother and the other exiles were still on that barren moon, building their own revolution in preparation for the day they could return to the galaxy. "If the Federation found them, we need to accelerate our timeline," Kale said, his voice carefully controlled. "Or we need to consider evacuation," Raven replied. "There are other worlds, other places to rebuild." "No," Kale's tone was final. "We don't run. We never run." Tessa saw the look that passed between Kale and Raven, the weight of leadership that pressed down on both of them over the past year. Kale had transformed from her partner into something more, the de facto leader of their growing rebellion. People looked to him for guidance, for hope, for the kind of unwavering certainty that his mother had once provided to the galaxy. But leadership came with a price, and Tessa had watched him pay it day by day. "There's another option," she said, quietly drawing both their attention. "We could hit them first, strike at the heart of the Vanguard before they can reach Zirion." Raven shook her head. "Too risky. The Vanguard operates out of classified facilities with military-grade security. We'd need inside information, perfect timing, and a lot of luck. Then it's a good thing I know someone who specializes in impossible odds," Tessa said, meeting Kel's gaze. Later, in the privacy of Tessa's quarters, they finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks. The room was small but comfortable, decorated with artifacts from her travels and a few personal mementos that spoke of the life she'd lived before joining his revolution. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Tessa said, settling beside him on the narrow bed. "When's the last time you actually slept? And I mean really slept, not that half-awake thing you do while reviewing intelligence reports." Kale ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture betraying his exhaustion more than words ever could. "There's too much to do, too many people depending on us, depending on you," Tessa corrected. "That's the problem. You're trying to carry the weight of the entire galaxy on your shoulders. Someone has to, not alone." She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes reflecting the soft glow of the room's lighting. "When we started this, we were partners, equal partners. But somewhere along the way, you started treating me like just another member of your crew." Kale was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." The admission hung between them like a fragile bridge. Tessa had seen him face down Federation warships, negotiate with crime lords, and plan operations that could have gotten them all killed. But this was the first time she'd seen him truly vulnerable. "Of what?" "Of losing you." He met her gaze, and she saw the depth of his fear reflected there. "Every operation we run, every risk we take, I know there's a chance you might not come back. And I don't know what I'd do if—" Tessa silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and reassurance into the contact. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "You're not going to lose me," she said firmly. "But if you keep shutting me out, you're going to lose us." Kel's arms tightened around her. "I never meant to do that. I know, but that's what's happening. You're so focused on protecting everyone else that you're forgetting we're stronger together than apart." They made love that night with a desperate intensity, as if they could somehow anchor themselves to each other against the storm that threatened to tear them apart in the darkness of space. Surrounded by the artifacts of a dozen civilizations, they rediscovered the connection that had brought them together. Afterward, as Tessa lay curled against his chest, Cale spoke into the quiet. "My father died when I was 8. A shuttle accident on one of the colony worlds. My mother never told me this, but I found out later that it wasn't an accident. The Federation arranged it because he was asking too many questions about their resource extraction policies." Tessa lifted her head to look at him, seeing the pain he'd carried for so long. "I swore I'd never let anyone I loved pay that price again," he continued. "But being with you, fighting alongside you, I'm asking you to risk everything for my family's war. Our war." Tessa corrected. "The moment I chose to stand with you, it became our war. Your mother's exile, your father's death. The Federation's crimes, they're my cause now too, even if it costs us everything." Tessa was quiet for a moment, thinking of the life she'd given up to join his revolution, the independence she'd prized, the freedom to go anywhere and do anything. She'd traded it all for something she'd never expected to find: a cause worth dying for, and a man worth living for. "Some things are worth the risk," she said, echoing his words from their first night together. "Besides, I've got a reputation to maintain." The great Tessa Voidheart doesn't back down from a challenge. Cale laughed, the sound breaking some of the tension that had been building between them. "What did I do to deserve you? You gave me something to fight for besides profit," Tessa replied. "And you make excellent coffee." "That's it, my coffee." "Well," Tessa said, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips, "there are a few other things." The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities. Intelligence reports indicated that the Federation's unification protocol was moving ahead of schedule, with several Outer Rim worlds already being forced to accept corporate governance. But there was also good news: their network had grown to include over 200 active cells, and support for their cause was spreading even to the core worlds. "We're reaching a tipping point," Raven reported during their morning briefing. "But so is the Federation. They're getting desperate, which makes them dangerous. Then we hit them before they can hit us," Cale said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him a natural leader. "Tessa's right about striking at the vanguard. If we can disrupt their operations, buy ourselves time." "I've been working on that," Tessa said, producing a data chip. "I've got contacts in the corporate security sector, people who owe me favors. One of them might be able to get us the intelligence we need as they plan their most ambitious operation yet." Tessa found herself watching Cale with new eyes. The frightened boy who'd whispered his fears to her in the darkness was still there, but so was the leader who could inspire people to risk everything for a dream of freedom. He was learning to balance both sides of himself, and she was learning to support him without losing herself in the process. "Whatever happens," she said as they prepared to brief their teams, "we face it together." Cale took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of long practice. "Together," he agreed. Outside their asteroid hideout, the galaxy continued its ancient dance, unaware that in the darkness between stars, love and revolution had found each other. The storm was coming, but they would meet it as they age. The strike against the Vanguard facility on Terminus Prime was meant to be surgical: get in, extract the intelligence, and disappear before the Federation could respond. Instead, it had become the spark that ignited a galaxy-wide conflagration. Cale stood on the bridge of the liberated Federation cruiser Defiance, watching as 3 more star systems declared independence from the Federation. The rebellion that had started in the shadows was now burning across dozens of worlds, and the crimson tide of revolution was rising faster than anyone had anticipated. "Sir, we're receiving transmission confirmations from the Corvin system, the Alderus colonies, and New Babylon," reported Lieutenant Torres, a former Federation naval officer who'd defected with half his crew after witnessing civilian massacres on the Rim worlds. "That brings our total to 43 systems in open revolt." "And the Federation's response?" Cale asked, though he already knew the answer from the grim expression on Torres's face. "They're implementing the unification protocol ahead of schedule. Corporate governors are being installed by force." and any world that resists is being blockaded. Torres paused. Sir, they've also issued execution warrants for you, Tessa, and your mother. Kel's hands tightened on the bridge railing. For 8 years, Zara Nightfall had remained safely anonymous on Zirion, just another exile among thousands. But 3 weeks ago, when the rebellion had exploded into open warfare, she had finally revealed herself. Her first public broadcast since her exile had been transmitted across the galaxy, and suddenly every person who had suffered under Federation oppression had a voice, a symbol, a leader to rally behind. Any word from the Shadow Dancer? Kale asked. Tessa's squadron should be hitting the supply depot at Kepler Station within the hour, Torres replied. If they succeed, it'll cut off reinforcements to the siege at New Corinth. Kale nodded. But worry not at him. They'd been forced to split their forces as the rebellion spread, and he and Tessa were now operating in different sectors of the galaxy. Every separation felt like tempting fate, especially with Federation hunter-killer groups actively targeting rebel leadership. Incoming transmission from Zirion, announced the communications officer. It's Ambassador Nightfall. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what had once been a simple exile facility, but was now the nerve center of the largest rebellion in galactic history. And there, standing with the quiet dignity that had once made her the most respected diplomat in known space, was Zara Nightfall. 8 years of exile had changed her. Her silver hair was shorter now, more practical, and her face bore lines that spoke of hardship endured and overcome. But her eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that had stared down corporate executives and military commanders, burned with an intensity that made it clear that exile had only sharpened her resolve. My son, she said, her voice carrying across the light years between them with the weight of a mother's love and a leader's authority. The Federation has made their move. 3 battle fleets are converging on the outer rim, and they're not planning to take prisoners. I know, Mother, we're doing everything we can to. No, Zara interrupted gently but firmly. It's time for me to return. Kale felt his heart skip a beat. It's too dangerous. The Federation has every route to the core worlds under surveillance. Zara smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the woman who had once tucked him into bed and told him stories of distant stars. My dear boy, did you really think I've spent 8 years simply waiting? The exiles who came to Zirion weren't just political dissidents. They were the best minds the Federation had to offer. Engineers, scientists, military strategists, intelligence officers. We've been preparing. The screen split, showing a tactical display that made Kel's breath catch. Hidden throughout the outer rim, dozens of ships appeared on the map, not the ramshackle collection of smugglers and pirates he'd expected, but a proper fleet. Modified civilian vessels, captured Federation ships, and several designs he didn't recognize. The Nightfall Fleet, Zara said with quiet pride, named for the woman who helped us understand that sometimes the only way to see the dawn is to embrace the darkness first. Mother, you've done brilliantly, Kale. Better than I ever dared hope. You've given the galaxy a voice, shown them that the Federation can be challenged. But now it's time for the next phase. Her expression softened. How is Tessa, despite everything? Kale found himself smiling, even in the middle of planning a revolution. His mother's first concern was his happiness. She's incredible. You'll like her. I already do. Anyone who can keep my son grounded while he's trying to topple a government has my eternal gratitude. Zara's expression grew serious again. But Kale, there's something else. The intelligence you extracted from Terminus Prime, we've been analyzing it here, and it's worse than we thought. The tactical display shifted, showing Federation troop movements and supply lines that painted a disturbing picture. They're not just implementing the unification protocol, Zara continued. They're planning to eliminate anyone who might oppose it in the future. Mass deportations, re-education camps, the systematic destruction of local cultures and governments, genocide. Kale said quietly, cultural genocide at minimum, physical genocide if anyone resists too strongly. Zara's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the worst of what sentient beings could do to each other. We have perhaps 3 months before they can implement the final phase. If we're going to stop this, it has to be now, over the Next several hours, as reports flooded in from across the galaxy, the true scope of what they were facing became clear. The Federation wasn't just fighting a rebellion. They were fighting for their survival as an institution, and they were prepared to burn half the galaxy to maintain their power. But the rebels weren't backing down either. On New Corinth, civilian volunteers were holding defensive positions against professional soldiers. In the corporate core, workers were staging strikes that brought entire sectors to a standstill. And throughout the Outer Rim, the Independents, movements that had been simmering for decades were finally boiling over. The communication from Tessa came just as Kale was reviewing casualty reports from the latest Federation offensive. Her face appeared on his personal screen, and even across the vast distance of space. He could see the exhaustion in her dark eyes. "The supply depot is gone," she reported. "But we lost 3 ships, including the Stormcrow." Captain Martinez didn't make it out. Kale closed his eyes briefly. Martinez had been one of their first recruits, a veteran smuggler who joined their cause after the Federation killed his daughter for protesting corporate labor practices. How many others? 47. Dead, 16 wounded. Tessa's voice was steady, but he could hear the pain beneath her professional demeanor. "Kale, they knew we were coming. Someone fed them our approach vector, our target, everything. A spy, or just good intelligence work. Either way, they're getting better at predicting our moves." She paused. "I heard about your mother's announcement. Is it true? Is she really coming back?" "Yes, she's bringing a fleet." Kale found himself needing to say her name, to feel that connection across the void. "Tessa, I wish you were here. I know. Me too." Her smile was soft but brief. "But we both have jobs to do. Speaking of which, I'm picking up Federation reinforcements heading for your sector. A lot of them." "How long do we have?" 18 hours, maybe 20 if they stop to refuel. It wasn't enough time to evacuate, but it might be enough to prepare. "A proper welcome. Can you link up with us?" "Already on my way. Try not to start the party without me." As the transmission ended, Kale found himself staring out at the stars, thinking about the paths that had brought them all to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been just another exile's son, burning with anger but lacking direction. Now he commanded a fleet of rebel ships and had the love of an extraordinary woman who'd chosen to stand with him against impossible odds. "Sir," Torres called from across the bridge, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the other rebel fleets. They're requesting coordination for a joint operation." "What kind of operation?" "A strike on the Federation capital itself. They want to hit Coruscant Prime while the main fleets are deployed to the Outer Rim." Kale felt his pulse quicken. It was audacious to the point of madness and exactly the kind of bold move that might tip the balance of the war. "Put me through to all fleet commanders." As the faces of rebel leaders from across the galaxy filled his screen, Kale realized that his mother had been right. The time for shadows and secrecy was over. The rebellion had grown beyond what any of them had imagined, and now it was time to either win everything or lose it all. "This is Kale Nightfall," he said, his voice carrying to ships scattered across dozens of star systems. "I'm told you want to take the fight to the Federation's front door. Let's talk about how we're going to do it." Outside the ship's viewports, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, bearing witness to the moment when a galaxy-spanning rebellion finally showed its true strength. Soon, the exiled ambassador would return to the worlds that had cast her out. Her son would lead a fleet against the most powerful military force in known space, and 2 lovers separated by the vastness of the void would be reunited in the crucible of war. The crimson tide was rising, and nothing would ever be. The Federation capital of Coruscant Prime had stood unconquered for 800 years, its orbital defense platforms and fleet anchorages making it the most fortified world in known space. Today, that record would be tested as never before. Zara Nightfall stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Vindication, watching as the combined rebel fleets dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. After 8 years of exile, she was finally home, not to the world that had cast her out, but to the stars themselves, where she belonged. "All fleets report ready," announced her tactical officer, a former Federation admiral named Helena Cross who had joined the rebellion after watching her own government order the bombardment of civilian targets. The Kale Squadron is in position. At the northern approach, Tessa's wing has secured the southern shipping lanes, and the Exile fleet is ready to begin the main assault. Through the vast transperistal viewport, Zara could see the sprawling cityscape of Coruscant Prime, countless towers reaching toward the sky. Like metallic fingers, each one representing the accumulated power and wealth of a government that had forgotten its founding principles. Somewhere down there, in the halls of the Federal Assembly, the same politicians who had condemned her as a traitor were probably learning for the first time that their carefully ordered galaxy was in flames. Signal from the Defiance, reported the communications officer. Kale is requesting permission to begin the operation. Zara smiled, thinking of her son commanding his own task force, with the courage and determination that reminded her so much of his father. Tell him he is my blessing, and remind him to come back alive. The calm officer finished with a small smile. He said you'd probably say that. The battle for Coruscant Prime began not with the thunder of massive guns, but with the whisper-quiet insertion of infiltration teams into the planet's defense grid. Tessa led one such team, her modified shuttle slipping through the orbital sensor network like a ghost. Neural disruptors are in place, she reported over the encrypted channel, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Defense Platform 7 is going dark in 3, 2, 1. One by one, the massive orbital fortresses that protected the capital began to malfunction, their weapons systems offline, their communication arrays severed. It was surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating to the Federation's defensive capabilities. Now that's what I call opening night, came Kel's voice over the fleet channel, and Zara could hear the grin in his words. All units, commence primary assault. The rebel fleet surged forward like a tide of righteous fury. Hundreds of ships that had once skulked in the shadows now flew openly through the heart of Federation space, their weapons blazing as they engaged. The remaining defensive platforms, the Vindication led the charge, its guns targeting the command stations that coordinated the capital's defenses. But the Federation wasn't going down without a fight. Emergency signals were already bringing reinforcements from nearby systems, and the Planetary Defense Force was scrambling to mount a coherent response. Incoming transmission from the Federal Assembly, reported the communications officer. Chancellor, Morrison wants to negotiate. Zara felt a cold smile cross her lips. Morrison, the same man who had orchestrated her exile, who had branded her a traitor for trying to expose his government's crimes, put him through. The face that appeared on the main screen was older than she remembered, marked by years of political maneuvering and moral compromise. Chancellor Morrison had once been considered a moderate voice in the Federation, but power had a way of corrupting even the best intentions. Zara, he said, using her first name as if they were still colleagues instead of enemies. This madness has to stop. Thousands of people are dying across the galaxy. Yes, Zara replied calmly, they are, and they've been dying for years while your government stripped their worlds bare and sold their freedom to the highest bidder. The only difference is that now, someone is fighting back. You could have worked within the system. I tried that. For the first time, Zara's composure cracked, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. I brought you evidence of corporate exploitation, of illegal resource extraction, of systematic oppression of the outer colonies. And what did you do? You buried the evidence and destroyed the messenger. Morrison's face hardened. You betrayed classified information to foreign governments. I shared the truth with people who deserved to know it, just as I'm sharing it now. Zara gestured to the tactical display, where rebel forces were systematically dismantling the capital's defenses. Your time is over, Morrison. The question now is whether you'll surrender with dignity or force us to dig you out. And if I refuse, Zara's smile was sharp as a blade, then my son will be very disappointed. He was hoping to capture you alive. The transmission cut out, but the battle continued to rage around them. Federation reinforcements were arriving, turning the space around Coruscant Prime into a maze of energy beams and exploding ships. The rebel fleet was holding its own, but casualties were mounting on both sides. Tess's wing is taking heavy fire, Helena reported. 3 ships down, including the Freedom Song. Zara felt her heart clench. Every loss was a tragedy, but they were so close to achieving something that had seemed impossible just hours before. Signal all units to press the attack. We end this today. On the other side of the battle, Kale was leading a desperate assault on the orbital shipyards where the Federation's next generation of warships was being constructed. His task force had taken significant damage, but they were within sight of their objective. Plasma cannons at 40%, reported his tactical officer. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 9. Can we still fight? Sir, we could fight, with half the ship blown away if that's what it takes. Kale smiled grimly. The people who had joined their rebellion weren't just fighting for political freedom. They were fighting for the right to determine their own destiny. That kind of motivation was worth a dozen Federation battle fleets. All ships, final approach. Let's finish this. The Defiance and her escorts swept down on the shipyards like avenging angels, their weapons tearing through the partially completed hulls of Federation dreadnoughts. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers as years of military construction went up in flames. But even as they achieved their objective, Kale could see Federation reinforcements massing for a counterattack. The rebels had struck hard and fast, but they couldn't hold the capital indefinitely against the full might of the Federation military. Sir, his communications officer called out. Priority message from the Vindication. Your mother is requesting all commanders to join her for the final phase. 20 minutes later, representatives from every rebel fleet were gathered on the bridge of Zara's flagship. Either in person or via hologram, Kale stood beside his mother for the first time in over a year while Tessa's image flickered beside them. Her flight suit scorched from her latest mission. We've accomplished more today than anyone thought possible, Zara began, her voice carrying the authority that had once made her the Federation's most skilled negotiator. The capital's defenses are crippled, their shipyards are destroyed, and their government is in chaos, but we haven't won yet. She activated a holographic display showing Federation fleet movements throughout the galaxy. They're pulling back their forces from the Outer Rim, concentrating everything they have for a massive counteroffensive. We have perhaps 6 hours before they can mount a coordinated response. What are you proposing? Asked Captain Reeves, commander of the New Corinth Defense Fleet. Zara's smile was radiant with the kind of fierce joy that came from finally being able to act. After years of forced patience, we're going to do something the Federation never expected. We're going to surrender. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Kale spoke. Mother, I think I missed something in translation. Not surrender to them, Zara clarified. We're going to force them to surrender to us, Helena. Activate the emergency broadcast system. Within moments, Zara's image was being transmitted to every inhabited world in Federation space. She stood, tall and proud, wearing not the simple clothes of an exile, but the formal robes of a galactic ambassador. Behind her, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and she seemed to command them all. Citizens of the galaxy, she began, her voice carrying across light years to reach billions of people. My name is Zara Nightfall, and 8 years ago, your government branded me a traitor for trying to expose their crimes against you. Today, I stand before you not as a traitor, but as a liberator. As she spoke, evidence began flooding the communication. Networks, documents, recordings, financial records, all the proof that had been buried when she was exiled. Corporate executives caught planning mass deportations. Military commanders ordering the bombardment of civilian targets. Politicians selling entire star systems to the highest bidder. For too long, you have been told that freedom is a luxury you cannot afford, Zara continued. That security requires the surrender of your rights. That the galaxy is too dangerous for anything but absolute government control. These are lies, spoken by people who profit from your fear. On world after world, the response was immediate. Planetary governors found themselves facing massive demonstrations. Corporate security forces were